Deutsche Bank boss Christian Sewing has warned of the dangers of growing right-wing extremism in Germany, also for the local business location. Hate and racism must have no place here, said Sewing, who is also president of the Federal Association of German Banks, the BDB, and he said that in a previously published interview with Welt am Sonntag, that's a German newspaper. From an economic perspective, there are also many reasons to take a stand against it, he said. Foreign investors are also involved in Germany because of its reliable democratic values and structures, and they are already asking whether they can trust them in the long term. Germany will only be able to get the shortage of skilled workers under control if we represent an attractive destination for qualified employees from abroad. Why did I say this? Because Sewing emphasized that he considers consideration of Germany's exit from the European Union, the so-called Dexit, analogous to the British exit, the Brexit, to be extremely dangerous and also ill-considered and economic nonsense. The negative consequences of Brexit for the British economy are all too obvious, and Europe is the biggest trump card we have in a global competition. Right-wing extremist AfD leader Alice Weidel recently said in an interview that a government led by her party would try to reform the EU and give the member states more sovereignty. And if this does not produce the desired result, she believes there should also be a referendum in Germany on remaining in the EU, as was the case in Great Britain in 2016. Several German economists criticized the party's economic policy goals in the magazine Spiegel at the weekend. The central problem is that the AfD relies on isolation and self-sufficiency, which destroys German competitive advantages. That was said by Clemens Fuest, the head of the Munich IFO Institute. This is in diametric contradiction to Germany's deep integration into the global economy, he said. The Leibniz Center for European Economic Research pointed out that, according to its calculations, higher earners and not lower income people would benefit if the party's demands for the last federal election were implemented. According to the federal government, Great Britain is a deterrent example of the development of a country after leaving the EU. I would point out to everyone who has such thoughts to ask, especially in Great Britain, how things are going. That was said by government spokesman Steffen Hebestreit on Wednesday in Berlin when asked what the Chancellor thought of the proposal of AfD co-leader Alice Weidel about Dexit. The speaker also pointed out that the world will have 9 or 10 billion inhabitants in 25 to 30 years. Europe and the individual EU countries would only be able to be heard if they appeared together. And the Minister of State for Europe, Anna Lührmann, had previously spoken of the Dexit proposals as a danger to our democracy and also to our Europe and our economy. Weidel described Great Britain's departure from the EU as absolutely right. If EU reform in the spirit of the AfD is not possible, one should think about leaving. She's such a nutter. Germany's withdrawal from the European Union, brought into play by the AfD, would lead to an enormous loss of prosperity in reality. No other nation has gained as much in exports through the EU internal market as Germany. That was warned by IW boss Michael Hüter. And according to economist calculations, implementing the AfD's economic policy plans would cost Germany dearly. A withdrawal from the European Union, for example, would cause the export-oriented German economy to grow by an estimated 6% less within a few years. That was said by the director of the Employer-Oriented Institute for the German Economy in Cologne, that is the IW, and that is Michael Hüter. He referred to experiences with the British exit as well. In 10 to 15 years, the minus would even be 10%. And we are talking about a loss of 400 to 500 billion euros, said Hüter. That would be thousands of euros in lost wealth for everyone. And no other nation has gained as much in export through the EU internal market as Germany. If the Federal Republic were to leave the EU, it would have to cope with significantly worse trading conditions than before. Just ask the Brits. The monetary union also eliminated the previous exchange rate risk, which was very burdensome. If we assume a growth loss in Germany of 5% only, that would be 2.2 million fewer jobs, said Hüter. And the president of the German Institute for Economic Research, the DIW, Marcel Fratscher, told the newspaper that the AfD's planned curtailment of tenant protection would lead to higher rents. The party's rejection of higher minimum wages would in turn result in lower incomes in real terms. And this means that more people would be dependent on government support. The AfD plans would ultimately lead to more social spending, said Fratscher. And AfD co-leader Weidel recently described Great Britain's departure, as I said, from the EU as absolutely right, which is completely idiotic. And if the AfD is just a typical right-wing party, they demand what they think is popular, but they don't know what they're talking about. And populists take on people's dissatisfaction and their disparate compromises, without which democracy does not work in their eyes. And they demand things that are hardly achievable or that sound better than they turn out. Just ask Farage. Weidel has exactly done that. And as I said, she described Dexit as a good path in an interview with the British Financial Times, and an opportunity to disenchant the AfD based on these demands is here. Because Germany out of the EU, that is her party's goal if the EU does not correct its weaknesses and if the states do not become sovereign again. And she really said we could hold a referendum on Dexit, which is not possible by our law, by the way. The British have shown the way with Brexit, and it was completed since the beginning of 2020, but that is an example against it. A Dexit would be against our interest, and we would be cut off from the internal market, from freedom of movement, from common currency. We would be cut off from research collaborations and educational opportunities. Defense would also become much more difficult for Germany. And to be honest, today we are a military dwarf, and we could harm ourselves. The people in the kingdom were once again shown the disadvantage of their goodbye to the continent at the beginning of the year. A study by the Cambridge Econometrics Institute estimated that the EU exit would cost the country 163 billion euros a year. And economic output is around 6% lower than in the rest of the Union. And in 23, Brits would have had an average of around £2,000 less per capita, while London residents would have had almost £3,400 less. 1.8 million jobs have disappeared, and what the study did not examine was Brexit itself has not changed anything when it comes to uncontrolled immigration. For Germany, which is even more interconnected and more dependent on trade with its neighbors, the economic consequences would be more drastic. So it's worth asking the AfD, with some of its right-wing extremist heads, what their goals are and then what they mean. It's not just about morality in the discussion about this extremist party. It's about our own interest. And if the Germans are... Sorry that I have to be frank here for a second. If the Germans are as stupid as the majority of the Brits that voted on that day for falling for this right-wing extremist populism crap, then I wouldn't understand the world anymore. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.